The concert's called Journeys, and it's all about the forces that have moved human populations around the world and around regions in the last few million years that we can trace human origins to. And so it's looking at the internal and external forces that shape the world in terms of human population and settlement and civilizations. And one of the things I find fascinating about this is that it's been a combination of voluntary and involuntary change, and both those things have been and still are very, very potent themes, very powerful themes, and they're themes which affect many of us in the world even today. There's all different reasons that things change in terms of populations and population movement. At your event, and we'll have a huge 6-metre screen with a lot of imagery, artefacts, photographs of modern and as early as we can migration, and the music and the narration telling the context around each section. But it's still a concert, so I'm going to be playing a lot of music in it, and I hope to do that today for you as well. So we look at the geological factors of the Earth that over millions of years have changed enormously. We've had ice ages which affect the ability of populations to find food. They affect the sea levels, which in turn affect access to land. And then when the ice ages finish, the sea levels rise again, and that access to land is cut off or changed. So that's a single environmental factor, and it's a huge one, because having space and land and having access to food and what we nowadays do, cropping, all these sort of things, I think it reflects for us how dependent we are on our environment. And when we hear things like climate change, global warming, we think, oh well, a degree or two. But a degree or two can change things radically about certain crops that just won't grow anymore, and certain things that are needed for propagation of all sorts of species of flora on the planet, bees, for instance. So these things can be quite catastrophic changes for the planet and the population, or they can be quite minor. So my task as the composer, artist, is to interest people in the audience, you, in the whole story, so that we start to reflect a little bit more on the huge history of the planet, not just our little 90 or 100 years or whatever it is on it. And I think that that's very instructive, because it brings a whole context of what humanity has been dependent on, and in many ways, despite our mod cons, what we're still dependent on, and how careful we have to be. How careful we have to be before we change things that have been in place, systems, organisms, oceans, all these things, climate, that have been in place for millions and millions of years for us. I always think the interesting thing is this move towards a cashless society. People forget we've had physical transactions with some form of money for many, many, many thousands of years. And if we suddenly, over a few years, we take that out of the picture, we still don't know psychologically what effect that's going to have on the world population. Tiny little things like that can make enormous changes. Anyway, so I'm going to entertain you with a little bit of music for a while. So this is imagining the early world, the early Earth, what we would call prehistory, where the hominid or the genesis for humankind existed in some form or other. Fascinating when you start to delve into all this. We have evidence of objects that have been altered by human hand in order to make them into tools of some sort to serve a purpose. We have these dark, almost black rock, obsidian rock. We have axe heads that have been shaped by human hand. Recently, at the end of last year, discovered for the first time, takes us back to 1.2 million years. There are artifacts of from ancient swamplands where the people at the time built walkways by cutting and fitting logs together. So all this early evidence of human influence and interaction with the environment. So this first part I'm going to share with you is my journey then as an artist. How do I convey that time? The narration's all very well, and we can put up scientific slides or artists' impressions of what humankind looked like at that time and what the environment would have been like. But I think the music's there, gives us the feeling perhaps of it, and that's our job as composers and musicians to help you to have an experience of that. So this is... So the job is to create some kind of atmosphere that contrasts with the different phases of the human story on the planet. And what we're talking about in the name of the performance, the concept will be journeys. So the forces that are pushing and causing migration on and around the planet. So the next thing is we look at is, okay, then there's these external forces from the environment, like volcanic activity and sea level changes and ice ages, and every now and again a comet crashes into the Earth and wipes nearly everything out, and then we start again. There've been, since the formation of the Earth 4.5 billion years ago, there've been over 90 extinction events, complete, total extinction events, which is fascinating when you think that the whole story of generating life forms and climate. The Earth used to be a carbon-based system, as you're probably aware. We breathe oxygen these days, but in much, much earlier times, prior to the evolution and appearance of humans, there was a whole time where it was a carbon dioxide-based planet. So all of these things they're all in the history, and they're all underneath our feet in the ground. Every mountain that you stand on was possibly once a seabed, and every seabed was possibly a mountain range, and we see evidence of all that. So there's the complexity of the Earth itself. But how's this affecting human populations? And what can we learn from this for the modern day? And I think that's as important as anything historically and scientifically correct that we can explore with this whole idea. So fast forward in time, so we have evidence of tools of human endeavour, but they can't stop the enormous influences of things like climate. And then humankind evolves and various civilizations start to appear. And then there's all the basic tribal things where certain tribes identify with certain areas on the planet, and that can grow, or it can diminish or disappear. It can move due to weather patterns, it can move due to curiosity, to go and explore other places and then settle there, inhabit those places. So there's many reasons why this next phase of human migration, development and agriculture took place. And then you start to get the power of certain human groups exerting that power over their own group about what they will and won't tolerate. And that's when you start to get forced migration, where from a human origin, where certain people are pushed out of communities and they have to go and find new places to live. We have extreme examples of that are wars and conflict, where people have had to move their entire community some way or a vast way to be out of harm's way. So it starts to get a lot more psychological in the reasons. We start to look at human psychology for the reasons of the movement. So no longer just responding to natural forces in the environment, earthquakes, sea level changes, ice ages, changes in weather patterns. No longer will there be animals to eat or crops to grow here, we have to move, that sort of thing. That continued, of course, but then we had, with the advent of more and more complex human civilization, human psychology, we started to have human-influenced migration in bigger and bigger and bigger ways. And we are, in the modern world, still not exempt from that. We still haven't kind of sorted that out yet. And again, I think it's not just enough to do a historic review of this. I think we need to learn things from. I hope that the concert gets people thinking, and we start to be interested in learning more about what can we take away from these things in history that can inform us to do things better now. And the other side of this that I want to bring is how humans respond. So there's the psychological precipitation of changes in migration, but then there's this whole area that there was a very famous writer who survived the Second World War in the Nazi concentration camps, an Austrian writer, Viktor Frankl, and he talked extensively about the way we respond to crisis, the way we respond to change, the way we respond to unpleasant or difficult situations, and this I think is where a lot of the second part of the story is, how we respond to events, what we learn from them, what we take away, how we grow in our understanding, how we become more creative in our problem solving as well. So that's the outline of the whole thing. I'm going to be a little bit more provocative than that in the concert and bring perspectives that I think are extremely important and positive, but they may upset certain worldviews about the right way to go about things, and I think that's part of how civilization has dialogues and evolves. So I think that's as natural as forces on the planet reshaping the planet. We reshape our intellectual thought and our values from those kind of turbulent interactions as much as any quiet, serene times, sometimes more. Anyway, I'm going to give you a few musical interludes along the way, because we're talking about the evolution of human civilization, and arts and culture and the appreciation of aesthetic has been a huge part of that for what history can inform us about, but also prehistory. We're starting to discover and understand more with the anthropology what some of those prehistory civilizations, like the massive monoliths in South America and parts of Europe and Asia, bring evidence of with these big stone structures. And musical expression has evolved just as much as anything else in all of this. So in the early times, we have the earliest musical instruments we can surmise were human voice and some kind of percussive element which came from hand claps, foot stamps, use of sticks, rocks, other objects that would produce some kind of resonance. And so in something as simple as that, conveying a very early form of, I guess, human-produced sound. We don't know, because there's no records from then, but we do know from the absence of artefacts that would suggest anything much more complex than that, that is in the region of the musical endeavours, and of course the voice we don't know. But we do know, we get some clues, because as times moved closer to the present, in the which one? It's the Neander Valley in Germany was discovered. What we have as the earliest man-made instrument, which was a small flute made from the bone of a bird, of a large bird, of a vulture. And it was about so long, not even the length of the body of the violin. And we know from the number of holes that someone had drilled into the flute to give us different notes, that they only had 4 or 5 notes at this time that they were using. And that's been a pretty consistent theme throughout Asia and the Americas in terms of instruments that have been found ever since, until very, very recently. It's what's called pentatonic music. And I'll give you a little taste of what that flute might have sounded like. And I'm deliberately using a form of intonation that's a little bit different from some of the Western classical music, so if anyone has perfect pitch, this could be a very upsetting experience. So it starts to be something a little bit more commensurate with what we've seen from some of the early cave art, the rock art in the caves, in France, in Australia, and in parts of Asia and in America, where it's quite gestural. You know, there's a hand print on the wall, or there's a drawing of some human figures and maybe some animals. So there's the degree of sophistication is pretty consistent with the visual portrayals of the human marks on the environment, and so the simplicity of the music seems to match, as far as ethnomusicologists and anthropologists can put together. It seems to match that, from that very basic, more percussive from that to the more slightly more tuneful. Of that old flute found in Germany from 35,000 years ago. We know that from the Australian Aboriginals' point of view, with their didgeridoos, we don't quite know when that originated. They're fairly old. I'll have to do some more research on that, hopefully for Thursday week. But that drone, even though it seems much more simple than the pentatonic music, it actually contains, because the way they change the colour of the sound and the way they use their voice and the other instruments with it, like the click sticks, it actually has quite a degree of sophistication, which is a lot more advanced than it might first appear. Very much on the level of their hand art that they've done with the bark paintings and the rock art. And finally, we get to the point of what we would call modern history, I guess, where things have evolved. We had the Greeks and the Egyptians and North Africa with a similar system where they had simple harps, and we know this from the relics that have been found, but particularly from the illustrations in the ancient Egyptian art. We just had a fabulous exhibition here. I don't know if you saw the Egypt exhibition here at the museum, but you see diagrams of harps and flutes, so we know, and drums, we know to some degree what their musical environment was like for that. And so in portraying those times in human history, and then the flute had its own set of variations. Anyway, so the way the music works for this as a composer, I'm trying to take you on a bit of a journey, and there'll be segments for 5 or 10 minutes where we're just sitting in the soundscape. As we explore each epoch and talk about all the forces that were shaping the world with humanity, particularly to do with the journeys, the music is an integral part, because in the modern world, when we watch a movie, we hear the end result. There's these threads through ancient Mesopotamia, North Africa, through the Northern European early civilizations. There's these, and the South American, there's these threads of sound that come through time that we still have the relics of. And of course, that is the music of the cultures that in our diverse, more multicultural societies, we get to experience all of this. I grew up in Melbourne as a child in the 1960s and 70s. And my big sister, mum and dad were away, she was at uni, and I would stay with her. She would take me out, because she was a uni student, to all the Lebanese kebab houses and the Indian restaurants. It was cheap food, it was really good food. And so, the thing for me in every one of those places was the music that was playing in the background. Chinese restaurant, Chinese music. Afghan restaurant, Afghan music. Indian restaurant, Indian music. Japanese restaurant, Japanese music. Turkish restaurant, Turkish music. So we have all these threads. Nowadays, it's not quite that simple when you go to eat, what you hear, but what we do have, and what I'm thrilled when I go into schools and play something like this. Kids put their hands up and say, Mr. Guenther, Kung Fu Panda. Now, that's significant in our modern education, because it means that the informal education of every kid almost has included almost every music of the world, because there's been stories about Aladdin, and of course they use the more Arabic themed music. There's the Celtic stuff. There's practically every genre, every culture's music is in the kids' films. So they've actually had a more diverse musical education than a lot of the older generation, which I'm quite excited about. So we have these threads, these artefacts, these sonic artefacts that have come through time, and the remnants of them, the modern form of them, still is around. And of course we have musicians from each culture still who play their culture's music, which is fabulous. But as I said, I'll be taking a much sharper angle with the observations of with the narration, the observations of the forces that have moved people in ancient and modern times, and what we can learn from that. And again, what I'm really interested in is where we start to care for humanity, not for my country, my tribe, my race, my whatever it is, income group, my skin colour, my language. We actually have an equal concern for everybody, because that is our only possible future, given the powers of destruction that we've developed with science now, the powers for total annihilation on the planet. We have to find a better way of getting along, and I think it would be remiss of it, I think, for probably any artist performance under the current climate, to not make these connections and put energy into people thinking about what our options are and where we can go now. And what I want to encourage through this concert, and again, it's a wonderful experience with the visuals and the music, as well as the narration, is for people to think about why we accept these poor standards of care for ourselves and others on the planet. And I want to leave you with that, because I think we can do a lot better, and it's not that hard, and we have all the resources we need. So it's very interesting to ponder on what's getting in the way of us sharing that in ways which will work for everyone, more or less. I don't think anything's ever completely fair in the world, but we can do a lot better than we're doing. So that's really the inspiration for this whole concert, and I'm using all of history to inspire and illustrate how it all starts in the minds of people. Everything we see in terms of all the journeys, migrations, wars, changes, forced migrations, migrations out of curiosity, they've all started here in people's minds and hearts. So that's what I'm going to leave you with today. Thank you for coming. I hope to see you at the concert. It'll make a lot more sense when you have the full experience for the hour and a quarter, the 75-minute journey. It's a bit of an immersive experience as well. Thank you for listening, and have a great day at the gallery.